When we talk about spreading the abolitionist message, it wouldn't be difficult considering the time we are uh, focusing on. Remember, in this chapter, we're looking at a period about 1830 to about 1860. It's also right around this time period we have the information revolution. There's a rapid development of print technology. There's this expansion of literacy, thanks in part to the common school education as promoted by Horace Mann. And we see more and more people willing to consume knowledge. Now, the standard of consumption, one could argue, in reference to reading and knowledge, you could say, well, the Bible, because the most widely read book in the United States at the time will be the Bible. Um, and that's even if you could read. But it's during this era when when you feel like you needed to learn anything, you could have there would be a tendency for people to probably say, well, you need to learn the Bible first. And you would have a great deal of followers all around the United States, filling up the pews, filling up churches, waiting to hear a message. And that would be the best opportunity because they're waiting to hear a message about the good news or the gospels. And then they get hit over the head with something like slavery is a sin. And this is a message that will be promoted by this man right here. His name is Theodore Weld. He's a young traveling minister who will help spread the abolitionist cause, spread the abolitionist message by way of religion. You know, the concept of sin is fairly simple. If it doesn't matter if you were educated, uneducated, poor, rich, black, white, male, female, from the north or the south, most people are understand sin. Some would argue you're even born with sin, and most people would probably also contend that uh, an upstanding Christian would probably try to reduce uh, as many sins from their life as possible. You know, the idea that you're going to live sinless for, you know, throughout your life is probably improbable, but at the very least, you should make every effort to reduce them and avoid them. And if we can recognize, if you're going to accept that concept that slavery is a sin, as Theodore Weld was promoting, then you knew that the institution of slavery had to go. So we learn about individuals like Theodore Weld because he's going to use a different weapon to attack the same problem, and that would be the institution of slavery. He is now using religion in order as his weapon of choice. We also see that the abolitionist message could be fortified by the message of transcendentalism. Remember that transcendentalism implied that there was no greater sense of ownership than the ownership of self, and that implies that there should never be bondage in the United States or within the realm of transcendentalism. The market revolution also encouraged the individual to do for themselves, to be self-reliant. And so you have the market revolution, the economy fighting against the institution of slavery. You had philosophy fighting against the institution of slavery. You had religion fighting against the institution of slavery. A freed black man urging a sense of a militant response. You had a white man who was free, and well, I mean that's kind of redundant, but a white man who was also championing a militant approach, and that leads us not finally, but leads us now to Frederick Douglass. Go ahead and underline his name, Frederick Douglass, right here, and he is an abolitionist as well, but he delivers his message from a different perspective. You know, we talked about a free man, we've talked about a free white man, both militant, and now we have Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery and at a young age was taught how to read. His slave master's wife that didn't see any problems with that, taught him how to read. Um, and it wouldn't take long before the slave master himself got word and ultimately forced her to stop teaching him how to read. But by then it was too late. The Pandora's box was open. He was thirsty for knowledge. And he even read a book in which the key figure in the book was a slave who ran away from his master in order to have greater opportunities and freedom. So Frederick Douglass says, well, then why don't I run away? So he runs away. He'll get captured and then he'll have to run away again, and the second time he runs away, he'll be more successful in his efforts. He will be protected by abolitionists along the Underground Railroad up north and will be invited to speak at various meetings and conventions that were obviously anti-slavery in nature. And people were shocked that this man before them was an actual former slave, a runaway slave, because of the diction, the manner in which he spoke, the way he articulated the story. The narrative was so vivid. They thought Frederick Douglass was an actor. They couldn't believe, and this just is evidence of, man, if you just give people a chance to be educated, the opportunities can be endless, and his education will be limitless, um, in that ultimately produce a autobiography to inform many others of what life was like growing up as a slave from the mouth of a former slave. He'll travel to Europe and spread the abolitionist message over there in regards to the United States and what they were struggling with. He'll travel back to the United States and support um, uh, the U.S. effort in preserving the Union and abolishing slavery. When we look at people like Frederick Douglass, he'll forever be a champion of civil rights and women's rights. And we have to recognize these individuals and also know that, every person plays a position, every person plays a part. We don't necessarily need an absolute leader on any given issue. The beauty of the abolitionist movement at large, and I'll talk about it in greater detail in a couple slides, is that it was a collective effort, and the actors and movers and makers were all varied in their style, approach, and perspective. Frederick Douglass happens to be one of them. Please underline Harriet Beecher Stowe. She is an author. She writes the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Go ahead and underline that as well. And this was a very vivid depiction of slavery in a novel sense. And what I mean by novel, not by the word new, but by the actual, it's a story. It's a story, and you're usually consuming it for entertainment. When you looked at something like An Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, that may come across as a bit too specific. And when you looked at something like The Liberator or The North Star, those could be considered newspapers or academic in a sense. And some people were thinking to themselves, well, I don't want to read into that type of stuff. That's a little too heavy for my headspace. But if you gave somebody a novel, that was seen as, well, I'm going to do this for fun, and let's see what it's about. So, well, it's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. I got an uncle named Tom. I like cabins. Let's make this happen. So people are reading this book. They understand that the author is Harriet Beecher Stowe, and she makes the argument that God wrote the book. Lincoln will make the argument that this book made the Great War. When we think about the consumption of a medium for the purpose of entertainment, what we ultimately can walk away from this, or take away from this, is that, if it's read in the house for entertainment, other people are going to be reading it, and somebody might bring it up at the dinner table. Somebody might bring it up in conversation, and then that will encourage other people to read into it so that they can continue in the conversation. And now we're all talking about it. What I failed to mention, or maybe I didn't mention it as clearly as I should have, Uncle Tom's Cabin is a book about slavery and how vicious and violent and vile that it is. It exposed many people who were not expecting. They're expecting some book about a cabin. Now they're looking into this institution of slavery, and they're having discussions in the House. They're having arguments in the House. They're having um, uh, they're reconciling their original positions in the House. Some people are not agreeing with mom and dad. Some people are disagreeing with brother and sister. It gets like that. The conversation is to be had, and it reminds me of a show on Netflix. And this was when uh, this was a while back. Students were, we talk about, hey, what are you guys watching? What's going on right now. And a student told me about this show called 13 Reasons Why. And they're like, Mr. Sauce, you got to watch it. Like, all right, I'll check it out. So I ended up, putting it on real quick. I had seen it up on the trending thing or whatever. So I put it up, and then it's like, all right, 13 Reasons Why. Like, okay, well, we didn't make it to 14. All right, cool. And then I find out that the show is about suicide or murder, and I'm like, what is going on? I was not expecting that at all. And what that show did in that moment was bring about a conversation, because people were talking about it, bring the conversation of mental health to that platform. The platform was emerging, that being Netflix, and more conversations were being had, because anybody could, pull up Netflix, watch the show, and be entertained. Just like back then, anybody could pick up a book and read Uncle Tom's Cabin to be entertained, only to find out that there were deeper connections or issues to consider. And that's what Uncle Tom's Cabin did. It made the discussion of slavery a household topic. You could not avoid it. The same way that you can't avoid Tiger King right now on Netflix. Like, everybody's talking about it. Why? Because we're all locked up. We're all trying to be entertained. Most of us have access to some type of streaming platform. If you own it or not, you've got a friend's account and you're making it happen. There are Netflix watch parties people are doing, and more people are having discussions, and more discussions about whether or not if animals should even be pets, especially these big cats. But that's neither here nor there. Y'all can check that out later. Let's move on to the next slide. On this slide, I want you to type or write out, do what you need to do. But I want you to be aware of this term, the abolitionist movement. Okay, so just take the abolitionist down here, movement, capitalize it. But this is the first racially integrated social movement in America. Never before have this many black and white, male and female people have come together on a social tip. Black and whites have cooperated economically before, fine. Black and whites have cooperated before militarily, fine. Black and whites have cooperated before politically, fine, but never on a social issue where we're questioning equality, justice. And the abolitionist movement will bring people from across the United States, across socioeconomic um, uh, barriers, and they will challenge for something better. This is the age of reform. And we're going to see the end of school segregation in Massachusetts as early as 1855. Granted, it's going to take Mansfield ISD a whole 110 years later to figure that out, but that's neither here nor there. The idea behind the abolitionist movement is that we've never seen this diverse attack on the pillars of what we believe America to be. And that's justice for all, equality, freedom, and all those other pretty sounding words. Now, it's during this abolitionist movement, we also become aware that women are also seen as second class citizens, not by their color, but by their sex, and therefore by their treatment. When you look at the abolitionist movement, whoa, I mean, there were women who were on the Underground Railroad, like Harriet Tubman. Sojourner Truth will speak out against the abolitionist. I'm sorry, for the abolitionist movement. Sojourner Truth will also speak up for the women's rights movement. We're going to have Harriet Beecher Stowe, and with the amount of women that were involved in the abolitionist cause, they began to realize that their own status in America was a status of subordination, whether it was social or legal, and that many concerns that they had were similar or akin to a slave in the South. So the rise of the public woman will uh, be somewhat tandem to the abolitionist cause. And I say somewhat tandem because it, women won't see the type of uh, rights or privileges that men immediately get um, shortly after the American Civil War. And what I mean by that is, like, primarily like the right to vote, protection under the 14th Amendment and stuff like that. But the rise of the public woman is definitely taking place. And we want to pay attention to these two women in particular at this moment and at this junction, and that's going to be Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. They are the key organizers of the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, and this is the one I really want you guys to know. I mean, like, I'm having you underline three things right here because I want you to know the women. But when you learn one, you end up learning about the other, I hope. In that, when we talk about the Seneca Falls Convention, which I think is the bigger concept that I want you guys to consume, is that you could argue that this marked the beginning of the women's rights struggle as an organized effort, as a collective effort. And these two women actually were traveling to the World's Anti-Slavery Convention, which was being held in London, because they felt like, hey, man, we're against slavery. There's some people in London against slavery. Let's go check it out. We're going to be amongst our peers on issues. And they show up and they're not allowed in. Why? Because they're women. And they're like, oh, so wait a minute. You have people that are against the institution of slavery, but not for seeing women as equals. And people are going to pick and choose what they want to do. These women are obviously bothered by it. They travel back to the United States and they say, nah, we can't have this. How is it that when we think we are with like-minded individuals who are fighting for uh, the abolitionist cause, and they don't see women as as having any type of value, that's an issue. We can't have that. So these women form the convention. They have a great deal of people in attendance. Uh, they have men in attendance, and they ultimately create a document known as the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments. And in this document is practically going to be like the Declaration of Independence, except wherever you see like he, they're going to add she to it as well. So like all men and then so slash and women are created equal, that type of stuff. And this document will raise the issue of women's suffrage, which is suffrage is the word used to define the right to vote or the ability to vote. It's going to condemn the patriarchal structure of America, uh, creating inequality for women by way of education, by way of employment, by way of property, by way of wages. And you can see how many women were actually in attendance and the fact that men were attending and they were okay with men attending, because the idea is, if you just they could have taken that attitude and said, no, we don't want any men up in here, we need to get our act together first. No, like, they understood that in order to solve this problem, we needed as many supporters as possible, especially from the other side of the aisle, if you will. These were not radical women who thought that men had no place in society because the way society was. They acknowledged that men were influential. They acknowledged that men wanted to help. They acknowledged that men had a lot of growing up to do, and that maybe if these individuals were aware of that, they would be able to communicate that back to other men. And so the sense of maturity by way of the Seneca Falls Convention is evident with their desire to allow men to be in attendance. And you can see even down here, let me see if I can find it real quick. Yep, there it is. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was in attendance. Again, most of them are transcendentalists, abolitionists, supporters, or just use the word feminists. And we see that at the tail end of this era, the genesis of the women's rights movement in America with the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848.